Let's talk about being a genius. Something I would not know anything about. But I wanted to discuss this notion of genius because I've heard some things recently that have been really interesting, and I like them. This kind of goes along with the Kill Your Heroes conversation from a while back. In a certain way, it's still incredibly different because that focuses more on why we shouldn't idolize people for different reasons. However, this, again, not idolizing people for different reasons than the Kill Your Heroes one. But I would also say this is relevant. Like you would say Kill Your Heroes, and it would be in this aspect as well. I think that a lot of the times that we use that word genius, we're thinking of someone who's born with a very extreme natural ability that is seemingly inherent in their nature to do something unnaturally well. And a lot of the time, I think that word is overused, and someone else, now I'm mixing Penn and Teller up. The one that speaks. I just can't remember if it was Penn. It must be Penn. He was just, using his words, he just said, people are lazy. When people call someone a genius, he knows that they're just lazy. I don't think I would go to that extreme. I think, again, culturally, we've got words that we use in certain ways for certain reasons. However, I do think it's interesting that the use of the word is so saturated, and it changes the context of language, not the context. It changes popular usage with words, right? That it changes the definition in a way because we use it that way more often than using it in a different way. And it feels weird to not use my hands. I just feel like I'm using my hands a lot. Anyway, besides the point, that people who use the word genius are just lazy was kind of his statement. And that's what kind of got me thinking about this. It is that I think it is very incredibly rare that someone is born with a natural ability to do a specific thing incredibly well. I think that more often than not, it is discipline and hard work that also you could have a mix of luck depending on your genes. I think there is natural ability that is gifted to certain people in certain areas and how they have certain talents. Certain things are easier for certain people. For me, math is not my jam. I don't think I could ever get to a point where it's like, you know what, I could work really, really, really hard and I'll just be like I'm going to go to MIT and just like be top tier math. It's just that my brainium is not made for that. It doesn't mean that I can't get to a certain level, but the average person can get to a higher level in math with less effort than I can. But that goes for things like reading music, learning a language formally. Anything that is formulaic is incredibly difficult for me. So learning music, that's a thing. Like reading sheet music, talking about scales and things like that, that's math. Like it is so difficult for my brain to just wrap around and comprehend and process and learn how to use it. I don't retain things very well by rote. I have to actually do that thing. And a lot of the time, it has to be practical. There has to be a specific reason why I do it that way. Math, a lot of the times, is so abstract when you get into a higher level that it doesn't make sense to me because I don't have a purpose in doing it, right? Like I can make a budget, I can budget time and I can budget money. That's what I can do. Like practical things, right? I've lost so much and I started falling behind in grade 8. But neither here nor there. There are some things that I think that people do have natural inclinations to do better than other people. That's not really a good sentence. But that I think there are some things that speak to people, or that, to use Goodwill Hunting, Will just says, oh, when it came to that stuff, I could always just play. Now, I think he is kind of genius level. I think he is that natural ability at an extremely high level, academically, mathematics, a bunch of different things. Part of that might be photographic memory or whatever else. This example is fictional character, but there are certain people that have been gifted certain abilities in certain areas that I think it still takes work and discipline to develop that further. But I do think there are some people that are just born innately with very specific talents at an extremely high level without doing that much work. But it is rare. Those would be those geniuses, right? In a lot of other cases, one of Penn's examples was like musicians and Bob Dylan and this and that. And it's like, man, when I realized the Beatles actually like had to do work and I saw their process, it like let it be, and like the videos and stuff from there, like they're having arguments and that solo didn't work at all. And what is this? And it's like as a kid, his mind opened up to like, oh, it just takes work. I can do that. And so it's just interesting because I've talked a lot about lacking a lot of discipline in my artistic practice, in my personal life, in a lot of different areas. It's very difficult for me. However, it's interesting because there's one thing that comes really innately to me that a lot of times, even by myself, is seen as a deficit, and that is anxiety. We can also talk about like, you know, the 10,000 hours rule. To be a master of something, you need those 10,000 hours. And for me, my anxiety leads to overanalyzing. And I think that is I'm not talking about genius level stuff. I'm just talking about that having anxiety has led me to overanalyze and reflect and whatever constantly. What I've had to do in order to have peace and order in my life, or to try to, is to bring that down and to create a balance where I'm like, okay, I don't need to go down every path and every rabbit hole and think about all these possibilities. It's not healthy. In some places it is a detriment, but it is natural for me to do. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I got my 10,000 hours in. And it's interesting speaking to other people who don't use their mind. Not necessarily that they don't overanalyze everything, but they don't analyze anything naturally at all, ever. And that it takes work for them to analyze things and to think about things. And that is so foreign to me, that you can just live in the world and experience things and not really process them. It's just like things are happening to you and you don't think about them. And I think maybe the average person does think about things, but again, like my level of doing that is usually seen as a detriment. But there's something in my nature that does that. And that's why I call it over-analyzing, because it happens too much, to such an extreme, that I have to find ways to rein it back. So for me, that's one thing. I don't think even artistically, like, I don't know. Someone made a comment once. This isn't like a toot my own horn type of scenario. They're just using examples from my life because I know my life better than anyone else's. Someone once in university in like intro painting made a comment about how I mix colors. And I just never thought that I was doing it any better or different than anyone else. But that seemed innate to me. It's like, okay, like I can just mix colors and I can mix back to a color. Like I'm paranoid that I can't mix back to exactly the same shade that I was using the other day. But apparently that is an ability that I don't know how. Like, this was intro painting. Like, I was not painting really at all in my youth. And so this university course was the first time I was really putting hours in with painting. And yet I was able to just mix colors. And I've done some, like, tests online, just even my, like to test for color blindness or to look at hues and put them in the right order of, like, gradient and stuff. And the shades are just a tiny little bit off. And it seems that the way that I see color is the way that most people see color. And it's very pure to what the hue actually is chemically, if that makes sense. It might not make sense if you're not artistically inclined. But anyway, another thing is composition. It's like, how do you teach composition? That again, for me, again, like overanalyzing and being incredibly observant all the time It's not something that I have to turn on. It's always on. If anything, I need to turn it off sometimes. That leads to skills like having compositional skills with visual art, to whether it be a photograph or a painting or whatever else, to realize that something is in balance or is harmonious or has unity. That comes very easy to me, and I don't know how to teach that ability of like composition, right? Like it's either you get it or you don't. A lot of the time, there are ways to discuss composition. However, it's also about taste, which is a whole different thing. But a lot of art is not as what's the word I'm looking for? It is not as subjective as people think. Some art is very objective. It's either good or bad. It either works or it doesn't. But it depends on your intention and purpose. So, anyway, I just think it's interesting to look at the word genius in this new, at least new to me, or just think about it in this context of like, no, those people just worked really, 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 really hard. And that if you don't want to work that hard in one very specific area, I wouldn't go as far to say it's like, oh, you're just lazy, but it's just a thing of like, I completely understand why he's saying that, because maybe the people surrounding him that say it like, oh man, you're such a genius, like I could never do that. And it's like, no, you could. You don't want to. Just be honest, right? Be truthful and just say, I don't want to work that hard. I don't want to get to that level in anything in life. I'm not going to. That person's not a genius. They're just good at working hard. They picked a path and they wanted to follow it to the level that they could. And I think obsessiveness is better. Like a more accurate description of that type of person than genius is. They can be like, that person is, or dedicated, right? Like, that person is dedicated to their craft. Wow, they are really good. They are amazing. But to say like, oh, they were born with it, like I could never do. No, I think it's so incredibly rare that you have someone that doesn't have to work really hard, that is at such a high level in whatever their field is. I think that's really all I have to say about genius in this context. But it was something worth thinking about, because it makes me want to analyze myself in a different way, to think about, again, how could I be working harder, but also acknowledge that there are some things that are in my natural abilities or just in my nature in general that can be considered gifts rather than detriments, and how I can use those things or how I have been using those things to my ability to learn about myself, to apply the way that I live life, or the experiences I have in life, to apply them on a daily basis and process them and think about what I could have done differently and better in those situations, or to just recognize in my just natural state of being observant, recognize certain things that are happening around me, and react to them in a way that maybe some other people can't, because they don't even recognize what's happening. I think that is also a skill that can be learned and can be improved upon. But it helps that having a more anxious brain and body or whatever, and heart, just being a more anxious person, also has these positive things, and these hours and hours and hours that I've built over time of practicing these skills. And I know that they are positives. I've known them for a long time. They're both. But again, I've had to refine how I use these abilities, because they're so natural and automatic to me that I never think of. It's not like going to paint. Being an artist, I think, is, at least at this point, and has been for a long time, very automatic to me, and it's the way that I live and breathe. Before I really understood what art was, I still had that observance piece and the analytical piece, but I wasn't applying it through an artistic lens, and I didn't identify as an artist. So I couldn't say that is the way that I operate in the world. But I think a lot of why I think about being an artist and identifying as that has to do with that piece of observance and analysis and how I process my own life. But I want to work harder. I don't need to be seen as a genius. That's not it. And it's not like, I don't know. That's the thing where I need to admit, and I have, but it's like, I don't want to put in that much work, or I'm too scared to make a jump to try to be that obsessive about a thing that would lead me down that road. I think that dedicated or obsessed with art, I am, but it doesn't show in that way of like, oh wow, look at you can make this photorealistic portrait. No, it is the way that I live and breathe. It is the way that I think about things, the way that I feel things, the way that I express myself is just through art. And I recognize that, and also, no, it's not based on, again, it's not, it's just not seen the same way as someone who might be that obsessed with math or a different path that you can say, oh, they've got the 10,000 hours in that one thing and it shows. Because without trying, I've got the 10,000 hours in on analysis. But I need to apply that in a very specific area in order to have that labeled as, oh, you're a professional in this area. It's the same genius, being a professional in that area, or being extremely talented in that area. Because even the word talent is interesting. Again, a lot of these skills are things that you develop with time and patience and dedication and studying, and not, I was born a genius.